get some photos of me in this costume too, really. What? Okay. Hey friends, welcome to Words, where we look at the stories that define us and why they work so well. A couple of weeks ago, I talked about The Banshees of Inisherin because it's one of the most nominated films for the Oscars this year. It's Oscar season and I get really excited to see what stories are going to come to the fore in terms of what we're watching and what we're interested in and what means something to us in this cultural moment. So the other film I really want to talk about that kind of it parallels Banshees of Inisherin but is also in other ways completely different is The Fabelmans. Fabelmans is another one that has been nominated for a bunch of awards. It's been nominated for 7 Oscars. The Fabelmans did win the Golden Globe for the Best Drama and for the Best Director, Steven Spielberg, which is no real surprise. The works that he has produced and the cultural legacy he has had. Steven Spielberg is a notoriously private celebrity, and it's surprising that he has gone for so many decades making such incredible movies, and we actually don't know a lot about him. So The Fabelmans was a real surprise because it's actually based on his young life and really his formative years and what kind of influenced him and how he evolved into the brilliant filmmaker we know him as today. So The Fabelmans works on a number of levels in contrast to The Banshees of Inisherin, but also kind of sharing a few similarities. Now, one thing about The Banshees of Inisherin is that it's written by a guy who is primarily a stage play writer. And so it is driven a lot by the dialogue and by the interaction that happens between the characters and the exchanges and the way they bounce off each other and the way those kind of tensions drive the story forward. Whereas The Fabelmans is very much about Sammy Fabelman, who is the alter ego of Steven Spielberg in this film. So what we see in this movie is really much more of a focus on the visual. That's not to say the dialogue and the screenplay is not brilliant, because it is, but the visual really drives the film. It's all about what we see, which you would expect coming from a filmmaker who is used to the visual media that he has engaged in for decades. So what we have here is a bit of a tribute to the art of cinema and how we are so moved by the effects that were created by really clever manipulation back in the day before they had CG. And it starts right from the very start when Sammy Fabelman is going to see his first film, and his mum and his dad are trying to psych him up about it because he's a little bit scared. And they go in and they see this film, Cecil B. DeMille's The Greatest Show on Earth, which is a classic. And there's this scene where there's this train crash and it really kind of shocks the young boy. And it's kind of shocking for the audience as well, the way Steven Spielberg has portrayed it. We imagine being back in those days and watching that kind of scene on the screen. It would have been quite confronting. For a young boy, this really resonates in his head and it kind of keeps him up at night. And he wants to get a train set for Hanukkah and recreate the scene as it happened. And so he crashes this very expensive train set. And so his dad's kind of angry at him, but it's his mum. And this is really significant because his mum is the one who becomes pretty much the main character of the film apart from Sammy. And her name is Mitzi. She becomes a really significant influence in his life. She makes this realization where she says he wants to control it. She gets him this like video camera so he can film the train crash, and expecting him to kind of just crash it and film it and that will be the end of it. But what he actually does, he films this sequence of shots and scenes from different angles to really recreate what happened in the movie. Mum, when she's watching this recreation, is kind of beautifully and delightfully astonished by what she sees. That is kind of the first hint that we get that the young Sammy Fabelman has really got it. He's really understood how the language of visual effects can convey such a powerful scene. It's from there on that the story unfolds and we see this coming back again and again. And probably one of the most climactic and influential scenes in the film is the moment when Sammy's high school film is shown in front of his entire graduating class, this beach day, and the effect that it has on the people that are watching it is quite significant. And the film does major on a number of these different film showings and the effects they have on the audience, and it really is Steven Spielberg's kind of ode to the effect of visual art and the way these moving pictures have really kind of captured and moved people. We see his kind of developing identity as a filmmaker, and from there on we kind of have these other really important crucial elements that make the film work. And the second one is characters. Whereas The The Banshee of Inisherin was all about the dialogue and the interaction between characters, the Fabelmans is really about the characters themselves having these momentous kind of roles in the narrative and also in Sammy Fabelman's life. The story very much follows Sammy Fabelman, but it's also quite significantly focused on his mother Mitzi, who we find out as the story progresses is a very talented piano player, quite a gifted musician, very intelligent and quite creative, and a little bit quirky in the way she lives her life and the way she kind of influences and raises her kids. But she is the one who really understands Sammy and really sees his potential and really understands what he's trying to do. And I should mention that Mitzi is played by Michelle Williams, and she does such a brilliant job. She's been nominated for a bunch of the lead actress awards, including the lead actress Oscar. Sammy's dad, played by an almost unrecognizable Paul Dano, his name is Bert, and he's also quite influential, but in a different kind of way. Bert, the dad, is portrayed as very kind, very intelligent. He works for a bunch of different kind of computer engineering companies, which back in those days was quite a significant career to hold. So you get this idea of Sammy being raised in a family that is both highly intelligent and highly creative, and the different tensions and the different emotional planes that is working on and how it influences Sammy in his upbringing and in his art. Another very significant character that comes into the movie, his uncle Boris, who is played by Judd Hirsch in a brilliant cameo. He's been nominated for a bunch of awards too, including the Best Supporting Actor. He's kind of comes into the film as this kind of feared character. He's this uncle of Mitzi, who she didn't really know, was a bit afraid of, and it turns out that he kind of ran away from home and became a circus performer when he was quite young. As he's staying with the Fabelmans, he talks to Sammy about his filmmaking, and he recognizes instantly in Sammy the same thing that drove him. Other characters come into play. Another character of significant impact is also Seth Rogen's character, Benny, and it is a little nod to Steven Spielberg's intelligence as a filmmaker that he's used Seth Rogen in such a role, because Seth Rogen, we know, is kind of a roguish kind of character. The Benny character is quite interesting. He plays a bit of a roguish role, but he's also very straight and also very kind. He does seem like an uncle to the rest of Sammy's siblings as well. And so it's kind of really clever that Steven Spielberg has cast him in this role as Benny, and I won't kind of give that away, but he plays quite an interesting role in the family dynamics. There's a number of different characters that really influence Sammy's development, and probably most surprising and significant of all is this interaction that he has with the jock character from his high school that he ends up going to when his family moved to California. This jock character features quite significantly in the Beach movie that Sammy Fabelman has made. It's the interaction that happens afterwards that really tells us the impact that this kind of visual art can have on people, and not only their interpretation of themselves, but also the way others perceive them, and also then the way society will receive them as well. We see this jock character actually realizing that and struggling with it for real, and it's kind of like a really interesting comment that Steven Spielberg is making on the power of movies to create celebrity and to create this idea of person and personality that we probably heighten a little bit as an audience, and that society itself kind of grapples with in terms of the power that we assign to these people. A very interesting reflection. The other thing the Fabelmans does really well is this kind of veneer of nostalgia. Steven Spielberg is obviously telling the story about his young self, and so it's set a number of decades ago. He does it really beautifully. It seems to be filmed on 8mm. It seems to be edited the way the young Sammy Fabelman is editing his own home movies, with this very intricate care. There's no CG, there's no heightened effects. It's very, very cinematic in the most authentic sense of the word. And we get this beautiful kind of golden color to everything. We get these really gorgeous colors, this rich intensity to all the films, and Mitzi's red lips, and kind of all these beautiful scenery in Phoenix and in California. We've got this nostalgic tone to everything. What that does is it has this effect of taking us out of the story, and so we are very much watching something occur, and it's that mythological, fable-like feeling that we get from watching something like The Banshees of Inisherin as well, which is also set in a historic era. We get this sense of removal. We're in the film, but we're also watching something that has happened to someone else, or something that is a story that's a fiction. It's a very clever technique that Steven Spielberg uses, because he is both embedded in the story but also quite removed from it. This has an effect, and this is probably the fourth thing I want to say about this movie. This has a great effect in terms of our emotional engagement. While The Banshees of Inisherin is quite confronting and traumatic, The Fabelmans is actually quite palatable. It's not easy to watch necessarily because there are some sad scenes, but the sadness is done so beautifully and so well that you don't kind of want to remove yourself from it. You want to be engaged in it. You want to be part of it. Even in the kind of really difficult, really sad moments in the film, you get this sense that, you know what, everything's probably going to be okay. And this is probably happening for a reason. So it's kind of part of the beautiful melodrama of life, and the sadness and the happiness and the joy and the sorrow. It's all part of the journey. That has this a very different emotional impact. And again, that kind of plays into this idea of nostalgia, of this idea of a story that has happened and that everything turned out okay. It's a lovely little comment at the very end of the movie where, I won't give it away, but Sammy Fabelman starts to enter into the film industry and he meets his hero, this wonderful director who's played by a very surprising and clever cameo. Again, I won't give that away, but it's a beautiful moment, and it mentions something about the positioning of a camera and the horizon. Again, I'm not going to quote it and ruin it for you right now, but at the end of the movie, there is this beautiful scene where we see that self-referential moment where he's taking his own advice into the filming of the movie, and it finishes with this lovely golden moment of hope. And we kind of understand that here's this young boy going off into this wonderful future of creating all these incredible films that we know Steven Spielberg has created. The last thing I guess I want to say about it is, again, the thematic qualities. Quite interesting that a number of the Oscar-nominated films this year all seem to play into this idea of life and art, of art and relationships. And we'll go back to Uncle Boris because he's the one who really sees Sammy Fabelman's passion for filmmaking. He sees it right to the core of his being almost. And he says, you are like me, you're an artist. Uncle Boris's art was circus performing and putting his head into the mouths of lions. And he's quite a quirky character. But he says, you're like your mother as well, and she's an artist with her music. And he does this thing where he's like, there's art in this family, and it will like, tear you apart type thing. And while this is really significant to the story, we don't kind of get that really traumatic tension. Maybe that comes later into Sammy Fabelman's life, I don't know, but there is definitely this sense of having to put aside what his family thinks and what possibly is expected of him to pursue the thing that he really cares about. Again, we have this theme of the sacrifice that is required to pursue art and to pursue something lasting, to pursue a legacy, to pursue a calling that is deep within oneself, as opposed to kind of the expectations and the understanding of the people around you. And that's beautifully told in this story. This kind of does come into a number of other films. I'm not going to list them all, but Elvis is definitely another one. Elvis won the Golden Globe for Best Musical / Comedy. So really it's the main contender for the Best Picture. And Elvis is also about these sacrifices that a person must make to pursue, I suppose, the art within them, and really the dark traumatic effects that can have on a life and on a family. And then we've also got Tor, the beautiful, emotive, surrealist film starring Cate Blanchett. There's a bunch of these kind of movies, interestingly, that are all interpreting the same theme of life and art and the tensions that we might find between them, and arguing really for the value of art creation and how we can do that well, I suppose, and be of value to society, but also be a decent human being, because that can obviously be a challenge. The Fabelmans is a beautiful, well-told story. And I don't think that it's an accident that it is called The Fabelmans, because it is really about the art of storytelling, of fable making. And Sammy Fabelman really is the fable man. And there are lovely little nods to all his work all the way throughout The Fabelmans, especially the influence of films like Indiana Jones and E.T., and war films that he's directed and other things that have happened throughout his career in the home movies that he makes, especially when he's a scout, and the beautiful kind of works that they create with the very small budget and small resources they have. There are lovely tributes all the way through to Steven Spielberg's upbringing, but also his legacy and his career. Even the way he directs and the way he films and frames certain shots is very nostalgic and harks back to a lot of the work that he's done. So a beautiful tribute to the power of cinema in particular, and well worth the nominations that it has received. Side note, John Williams wrote the score, and so, you know, probably going to be nominated for an Oscar. The Fabelmans, another one to check out. And while you're at it, check out Steven Spielberg's works and anything that you haven't seen, because they're all brilliant and they're a lot of fun. Thank you. I hope you have enjoyed talking about the Fabelmans, and I hope that you get a chance to kind of have a look at some of the Oscar-nominated films, because these are the movies that are really shaping and speaking to the cultural atmosphere of our world at the moment. Thank you for joining me on Words. I'm Elise James. It's been a lot of fun. And if you have enjoyed this, please don't forget to like us and subscribe and check out our other socials. Thanks so much, and see you next time.